Since 2015, California has invested over $10 billion in its high-speed rail project. Yet more than a decade after breaking ground, there isn't a single operational mile of track to show for it. Come on, California, get your shit together. Initially envisioned as the future of transportation, the project promised a sleek bullet train that as early as 2008, voters were told would whisk passengers from San Francisco to Los Angeles in under 3 hours. It was touted as faster than driving, cleaner than flying, and capable of reshaping California's economy and climate legacy. It's been a bit of a while, hasn't it? But here we are in 2025, and the only thing moving quickly is the project's timeline, and it's moving quickly in the wrong direction. There is no train, there's no completed line, there's no connection to Los Angeles, and no scheduled service at all. All that exists is a stretch of track in the middle of California's Central Valley, accompanied by a growing mountain of lawsuits, debt, political infighting, and broken promises. The original cost has quadrupled. The finish date has long since passed its deadline, and critics have dubbed the project a train to nowhere. At this point, the question's no longer, will California get high-speed rail? Instead, it's, what is California actually building? Billions have been spent, and there's not a lot to show for it. The original version and the problem it set in motion. So, in 2008, voters embraced the idea of a high-speed rail line in California, and understandably so, given the tantalizing promises circulating at the time. Imagine a journey that covers what previously took 6 to 7 hours in merely 2 to 3, without the hassle of airport lines. It would mean better access to more affordable housing, improved climate management, and a system designed to rival Japan's Shinkansen. I mean, what's not to love? Well, that same year, voters passed Proposition 1A, authorizing nearly $10 billion in bonds to launch a new rail system connecting San Francisco to Los Angeles. With a projected price tag of $33 billion, the entire project was expected to be completed in 2020. Nope. 5 years later, California. Now it's 2025, and there isn't a single operational track in place. There are a host of reasons for this. For one thing, California is a big state, and it's not flat. To connect its 2 largest cities by train, the route must cross mountain ranges, weave through urban centers, and tunnel through seismic zones. In addition, planners must navigate federal regulations, state environmental laws, and local lawsuits from every suburb that opposes having a train run through their backyard. It didn't help that some of those backyards were in Atherton and Menlo Park, which are 2 of the wealthiest zip codes in America, and they could afford better lawyers. As a result, by 2022, the Rail Authority was still trying to secure the necessary land for Phase 1 of the project. In some instances, the state paid double or triple the land's original value simply to avoid further delays. How the rich get richer. So, the costs ballooned from an estimate of $33 billion in 2008 to $64 billion by 2016, $77 by 2018, and now wait for it, $128 billion today. That is 4 times the original estimate, and the project still isn't even halfway done. And then there is the timeline. The trains were supposed to be running 5 years ago. Now the best case scenario is 2033 if everything goes exactly as planned, which it won't because it hasn't. The original plan for the project was to build in 2 phases. The first phase was meant to run from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim through the Central Valley, covering a 494-mile stretch. The second phase was designed to extend the system north to Sacramento and south to San Diego, bringing the total length to 776 miles. However, in 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom publicly scaled back the vision, announcing that the state would focus solely on completing the Merced to Bakersfield segment, a 171-mile section that comprised 35% of the total planned route. This announcement sparked significant initial backlash, with critics accusing the governor of dismantling the project, even though he was merely specifying where the project should concentrate its efforts to maximize the limited funds. How many limited funds? 128 billion? Part of criticism stemmed from the fact that the Central Valley is not traditionally considered a high-demand corridor. As one critic put it, why is the US building its most expensive high-speed rail line in a place with so little demand when it hasn't even fully upgraded the lines in areas that already move 12 million riders a year? It's like building a Formula One car and then racing it through a cornfield. Yes, the Central Valley is flat. Yes, land is cheaper. But that's precisely the problem. California opted for the easiest location in which to build, not necessarily the area where people most need to travel. Critics argue that a high-speed train between Fresno and Bakersfield is the wrong kind of proof of concept. They claim it's the least convincing stretch, and if the economics don't work here, why should taxpayers trust the rest of the project? However, there is a counter-argument, echoed by international rail experts, engineers, and even some fiscal conservatives. And that's that you have to start somewhere. Japan didn't open the Shinkansen by connecting every major city at once. France didn't build the TGV overnight. Every high-speed rail system begins with a spine, a test route that allows engineers to get things right, build public trust, and then scale up. In this light, it becomes easier to build a railway connecting two cities when you can first prove that it works with what appear to be lower-stakes towns. Nonetheless, critics have not let go of the train-to-nowhere tag. And they're not entirely wrong either, because there are no major stations at either end of the tracks yet. There's no connection to existing transit and no way to actually test high-speed rail, as the line isn't long or complete enough to run trains at full speed. All of these elements remain in the proposal or construction phase, and it's understandable that people will grow tired of hearing, "It will be," when they haven't seen concrete proof in over 17 years that anything is gonna happen. However, considering that if this line does get completed, Merced will become a hub as the tracks connect Amtrak San Joaquin's to UC Merced, one of the fastest growing university campuses in the state. This means the Central Valley segment could potentially develop into something far more significant if it receives proper funding and political protection. Right now, though, the political outlook isn't exactly brilliant. Legal battles, political resistance, and delays. If the Central Valley were the only battlefield, California's bullet train might be halfway done by now. But it's not. From day one, this project has been caught in a gridlock, a tangle of legal resistance, political sabotage, and a revolving door of governors with conflicting visions. The original champion of California high-speed rail was Governor Jerry Brown. Yet even after his strong advocacy, the project didn't materialize until 2008 when Arnold Schwarzenegger, yes, the Terminator, but also the governor of California, signed the bill authorizing the bond measure for the ballot. However, the ink hadn't dried before the lawsuits began rolling in. The first major lawsuit came from Kings County in 2011, challenging the new state's environmental review. Next, it was Union Pacific Railroad, demanding that the state stay off its right-of-way. This was followed by dozens of eminent domain cases as farmers resisted state efforts to seize slivers of land through legal force. And some of these changes worked. Entire stretches of the route had to be redesigned and environmental reviews redone. In certain towns, such as Hanford and Chowchilla, local resistance forced alignment changes, pushing engineers to reroute the tracks entirely, and sometimes by miles, just to avoid litigation. However, the biggest lawsuit, well, that involved a city called Millbrae. Located just south of San Francisco International Airport, Millbrae is a transit hub, and the only place where BART, Caltrain, and the future high-speed rail system are all meant to intersect. This made it the single most critical station in the high-speed rail plan. For years, plans stalled as the city objected to the design, the traffic impact, the station footprint, and the disruption to local development plans. But fortunately, that changed in April 2025. After months of negotiation, the California High-Speed Rail Authority and the city of Millbrae reached a legal settlement, with the city withdrawing its objections. The authority agreed to revise station plans, implement new traffic mitigation measures, and enhance coordination with local transit agencies. But that was only the beginning, as construction teams wrestled with lawsuits in the valley while Sacramento itself was undergoing transformation. The governor who initially proposed this project had returned. Governor Jerry Brown picked up right where he left off, and it was under his watch that construction officially began in 2015. In 2019, Gavin Newsom took office and, in that same year, announced his plan to focus on the 171-mile stretch between Merced and Bakersfield. Then came the Trump administration, which outright cancelled a $929 million federal grant in 2019, accusing California of failed leadership and mismanagement. That funding was crucial for key Central Valley construction, and without it, the entire project slowed to a crawl. It wasn't until Biden's infrastructure push in 2021 that the situation began to reverse. California was awarded $202 million in 2023, followed by a record-breaking $3.1 billion grant in 2024, both specifically aimed at accelerating electrification and bridge work in the valley. But even that funding came with strings attached. Unlike previous rounds of funding, this time the feds demanded clear timelines, ridership metrics, and realistic cost controls. And that's when the next political bombshell went off. To unlock those funds, the California High-Speed Rail Authority had to rebid contracts, revise cost estimates, and publicly admit the previous schedules had been a little bit optimistic. This led to dozens of contracts being reevaluated or reissued between 2022 and 2024. Meanwhile, the cost of the entire project ballooned to that $128 billion figure, and the full San Francisco to Anaheim line is now optimistically slated for completion sometime in the 2030s. Yet the project still faces friction. In Sacramento, a new round of political resistance is emerging. Some Republican legislatures and even a few Democrats are pushing for bills to divert rail funds toward road upgrades and freight logistics. Their argument? California's housing crisis, water shortages, and wildfire response deserve priority over a train that no one can ride yet. And as if that wasn't enough, the federal government pulled the plug again. With Trump back in office, the federal government wasted no time in cutting $4 billion in funding from California's high-speed rail project, just as construction in the Central Valley was reaching full stride. The U.S. Department of Transportation argued that California had failed to meet its obligations. According to them, missed deadlines, inflated budgets, and a project that was more than a decade behind schedule and nowhere near completion were enough reasons to pull funds from what appeared to be a money pit. However, the state disagreed. Governor Gavin Newsom called the political move a hit job, a way to punish California for pursuing a project the federal government never truly supported. Moreover, the decision sharply contrasted with Trump's own transportation policies, which favored highways and fossil fuels. How forward-thinking. In a June the 12th press release, California High-Speed Rail CEO Ian Chowdhury called the FRA's claims inaccurate, misleading, and unjustified. He pointed to over 400 miles of environmental clearance, active construction stretching across 119 miles in the Central Valley, and 25 active overpasses and structures in progress, many of which are federally approved. He also pointed out that California has not violated any contractual deadlines regarding the ARRA funding currently in dispute, and that all extensions and reporting have occurred with FRA approval. At the time of the cut, nearly 15,000 workers were actively involved in construction. Cutting funds would jeopardize both the project's progress and the livelihoods of these workers. The state argued that although the project's pace was not perfect, progress was indeed being made, and that rescinding funding now would not save taxpayers money. It would simply leave the project stranded midstream. That $4 billion was intended to fund key systems such as power infrastructure, signaling, station development, track installation, and electrification. Without that investment, California would be unable to move beyond laying concrete foundations to establishing an operational rail network. But Washington remained unmoved. In response, the state filed a suit. California is arguing that Washington cannot simply claw back funding retroactively, especially after binding agreements have been signed and billions of dollars have been invested. Legal experts warn that the case could take years to resolve, and by then the damage may already be done. Chowdhury has been seeking private sector investments that could serve as a financial safety net if the lawsuit is lost. However, there is a lingering question. Will a private sector investor commit to a project that has already exceeded its initial deadline by 5 years, is politically vulnerable, and lacks links to major population centers? The situation remains a tug-of-war between the federal government and California, but the true concern is whether the entire project will survive or come to an end. Any further delays could extend the timeline by years, and with each passing year, the costs only increase. There's also a broader implication that not everyone seems to notice. When a mega project like this falters, it sends a resonant message to states, agencies, and future plans across the nation. As one observer put it, if California can't build high-speed rail, even with federal support, how could anyone else? How far has construction come? The California High-Speed Rail Authority currently reports over 54 completed structures, 30 still under construction, and 8 more not yet started. A notable structure is the San Joaquin River Viaduct near Fresno. It's a signature piece of infrastructure nearly 4,700 feet long and featuring sweeping arches combined with a double concrete box girder design. This viaduct stands out as one of the largest rail bridges in the state, spanning not only the river but also a busy state highway and the Union Pacific Freight Line. And then there's the pergola structure north of Fresno. The engineering marvel elevates the high-speed rail tracks over existing freight rail corridors. Now you might be wondering if it had to be a pergola structure. And the simple answer is that freight trains couldn't easily be rerouted and digging underneath wasn't an option due to groundwater levels. So engineers designed a 50-foot-high elevated crossing that lets passenger trains soar overhead, a solution that admittedly costs more than a tunnel, but does preserve the freight corridor. South of that, near Hanford, you'll find the Hanford Viaduct. It stretches 6,330 feet, making it the longest structure in the entire Central Valley segment. The viaduct crosses not only major highways, but also delicate wetlands where construction crews had to use pile-driven foundations to minimize environmental disruption. Across Kings, Fresno, Tulare, and Kern counties, you'll see concrete box girder bridges spanning local roads and rivers, rail trenching operations near downtown Fresno and Bakersfield to sink future stations below grade, high-speed rail embankments that have been graded and prepared for track but are still awaiting ballast and rail, and utility relocations where crews have spent years moving water, powering gas lines just to clear the way for the track bed. In Madera County, work is progressing on the Avenue 8 and Avenue 11 overcrossings, while in Wasco, the construction of the State Route 46 underpass is wrapping up after several delays. Meanwhile, in Shafter, crews are constructing a maintenance of way facility, the backbone of the system's operations, a place to store, service, and dispatch work trains for the ongoing upkeep of the line. Although none of the track has been electrified yet, and no train has ever run on it, the foundation is already in place. The right-of-way is being graded, concrete guideways are being poured, and both the overpasses and underpasses are rising. All told, this marks the most intense concentration of rail megaproject activity in the United States today, and it's all happening in towns that have never seen an investment in public infrastructure on this scale. And that presents its own challenges, as each structure must comply with seismic design codes, floodplain regulations, and federal accessibility mandates. Every piece of concrete is poured to spec, cured, inspected, and rechecked. Each viaduct must be aligned within millimeter tolerances, or the train, when it finally arrives, simply won't run at its 220 mph speed. That's why progress has been slow. But it's also why what has been built may last for 100 years or more. Still, what doesn't exist is a continuous rail line. Many of the guideway segments end abruptly, sometimes in the middle of farmland, awaiting the next viaduct or trench to connect them. Some sections are nearly complete, just waiting for the tracks to be installed. A track and systems contractor has been awarded, meaning that rail installation, electrification, and signaling can now begin. However, as of July 2025, not a single inch of operational track has been laid. And there's a reason for this approach. Before any track is installed, the base layer, including subballast drainage and embankment stabilization, must first be thoroughly tested and approved. Contractors cannot afford to lay tracks that might later buckle or settle. Additionally, California's unique soil conditions, soft clay in some regions and sandy loam in others, have required specialized engineering solutions. And then there's the stations. Fresno, Merced, and Bakersfield all have identified station sites. Most of the environmental work is complete, although actual construction still awaits initiation. Design plans are in development, but vertical construction of the platforms, ticketing halls, elevators, and solar roofs has yet to begin. American infrastructure comparison. Some hard truths. While California is struggling to complete 171 miles in the Central Valley, China has built a continent-spanning network that connects cities thousands of miles apart and runs trains at speeds of up to 217 miles an hour. Some routes are even longer than a Los Angeles to Seattle trip, and they can be finished in under 8 hours. Beijing to Shanghai, 5 hours. Wuhan to Guangzhou, 3. Fully electrified, on time, and in many cases cheaper than a plane ticket. So how did they do this? Well, the answer lies in scale. China benefits from centralized political power, fewer layers of litigation, and aggressive land acquisition laws. Once a project earns top-level approval, it gets built. But the second answer is intent. China treats high-speed rail not as a luxury, but as core infrastructure like roads, water, even national defense. That mentality changes everything. And now let's look at Europe. France's TGV was Europe's first trailblazer. Its trains hit commercial speeds of 186 miles per hour in the 1980s. The country didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Instead, it just added new high-speed tracks between key cities and connected them with upgraded legacy lines. The result is a practical, functional system that works seamlessly across both old and new terrain. Spain followed suit, so did Germany, so did Italy, each of these nations building their systems in less time, for less money, with less drama. Even the UK, with its notoriously slow planning system, as discussed in a previous video, has managed to construct high-speed segments like HS1, linking London to the Channel Tunnel. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Shinkansen, the world's first high-speed rail system, has been running since 1964. You can check out our video on that if you want to learn more. It's quite amazing. And look, this isn't about shaming. California isn't China, or France, or Japan. But that's the point. To understand why California is struggling, we must consider the challenges that these other countries didn't face. Let's start with land. In France or China, once the government approves a corridor, land acquisition moves swiftly. But in California, it's an endless legal maze, complicated further by NIMBYism. In Europe and Asia, the prospect of a high-speed rail line cutting across farmland or suburban towns generally does not spark mass resistance. In many cases, it's even welcomed. In California, however, every new mile of rail must contend with lawsuits from landowners, counties, cities, and environmental groups. While eminent domain is an available tool, it is a slow, legally complex, and politically dangerous process. Even supporters of the project will sue if they believe the environmental review overlooked a single detail. One town might demand a tunnel, another may insist on moving the station. Each change adds cost and delay. The legal and regulatory thicket is uniquely American and plays a major role in why even shovel-ready projects take years to break ground. Some point to Brightline as proof that high-speed rail can work in the US, and they're not wrong. Brightline is efficient, modern, and relatively inexpensive. It's already operating between Miami and Orlando, and there's a planned extension to Tampa. However, Brightline followed a very different path. It was built on existing freight corridors, which eliminated the need for new land acquisition. Its speeds top out at 125 miles per hour, which is fast, but it's still well below the international definition of true high-speed rail, which starts at 155 miles per hour for upgraded lines, at 186 plus for new ones. Most importantly, Brightline is for profit. Its route wasn't chosen not for public service, but because that's where private investment would pay off. California's system, on the other hand, was designed to serve the public interest by connecting underserved communities in the Central Valley, reducing highway congestion, and cutting carbon emissions. This goal requires taking routes through areas where no one else would build rail, which means higher costs, more resistance, and greater risks. And then there's a sealer. The Northeast Corridor's flagship service has been Amtrak's pride since 2000. It runs between Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston, three of the densest metro areas in the country. But let's be honest, it's not really high speed, not in the global sense. Sealer trains can theoretically reach 150 miles per hour, however, due to aging tracks, tight curves, and shared freight corridors, the average speed from DC to Boston is just 66 miles per hour, barely faster than driving. This year, Amtrak plans to introduce new Sealer trains that can hit 160 miles per hour, but unless the tracks are upgraded, and they won't be anytime soon, those speeds will only be possible for a few short stretches. While Japan's bullet trains average 240 miles per hour across the entire line, the US version is more kinda quick, not really high speed. The California high-speed rail project isn't merely a case study in poor planning. It reflects something deeper: America's crisis of infrastructure confidence. At one time, this was the country that built the Hoover Dam in 5 years, laid 47,000 miles of interstate highway in under 3 decades, and even put a man on the moon before people had calculators in their homes. And now, it can't build a train. Not because the technology isn't there, not because the money isn't available. Instead, the system, the institutions, the incentives, the politics, is all broken. California's high-speed rail isn't just a transportation project. It's a litmus test, a proof of concept, a battle to show that America can still think big and deliver. But so far, that battle's just not going very well. Thank you for watching.